Welcome back to our channel. We hope you will have a wonderful learning experience here with us. You can download and listen to these audiobooks at your preferred time. This is Chapter 6 of Freshman Inclusiveness course taught in all the Ethiopian universities. This chapter deals with legal framework. It is tailored exactly to the fitting of the Ethiopian Ministry of Education curriculum but is also very useful for any related course. I am very happy you have chosen this channel in your study and politely ask that you subscribe, like and share the channel for more amazing tutorials. Now, without further ado, let's begin our course. After completing the study of this chapter, you will be able to discuss the concept of legal framework. Identify international and national legal frameworks in relation to inclusiveness. Discuss legal frameworks and their implementation. Explore gaps in implementation of legal frameworks to implement inclusion. Brainstorming questions. 1. Do you think legal framework is necessary to implement inclusion? If your answer is yes, explain reasons or your answer. If your answer is no, please try to give reasons. 2. Do you think that inclusion in Ethiopia is supported by legal frameworks? If your answer is no, please try to give reasons. Discrimination against persons with disabilities has a long history and persons with disabilities are regularly excluded from participation in society and denied their human rights. Discrimination against the disabled can take many forms, ranging from limited educational opportunities to more subtle forms, such as segregation and isolation because of physical and social barriers. The effects of discrimination are most clearly felt in the sphere of economic, social and cultural rights, in the fields of, for instance, housing, employment, transport, cultural life and access to public services. The obstacles the disabled face in enjoying their human rights are often the result of exclusion, restriction, or preference, and, for instance, when the disabled do not have access to reasonable accommodation on the basis of their limitations, their enjoyment or exercise of human rights may be severely restricted. In order for disabled persons to freely enjoy their fundamental human rights, numerous cultural and social barriers have to be overcome. Changes in values and increased understanding at all levels of society has to be promoted, and those social and cultural norms that perpetuate myths about disability have to be put to rest. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. However, this is far from being a reality for persons with disability around the world. This is because people with disabilities' living conditions are always worse than those of other citizens. They are very often excluded and marginalized different areas of life such as participation in education, social activities, economy, and politics and so on. The rights of persons with disability have increasingly been recognized by international and national law. For example, the Declaration on the Rights of Mentally Retarded Persons, 1971, and the Declaration on the Rights of Disabled Persons, 1975, both establish the principle of equality of the rights of persons with disability. The Declaration on the Rights of Deaf-Blind Persons, 1979, adopted by the Economic and Social Council, provides universal rights. The above legislations and other which were enacted after the above declarations prompted people with disabilities addresses all aspects of disabled persons' lives, such as equal opportunities, physical environment, services, education, employment, and social welfare. Using legal frameworks regarding persons with disability suggests some measures governments should take in order to ensure that persons with disability become fully equal citizens. The rules also act as an international instrument and as a mechanism of control to guarantee the effective application of the stated rights. However, it is not possible to force governments to apply them, and the rules require a concrete commitment from governments in order to transform equal opportunities for disabled persons into reality, a commitment which is often lacking. Legal frameworks regarding inclusion. They also have right to use public services, civil right, membership of any associations and organization, participation in different activities like voting. Children and youth with disabilities have moral, civil, parental, ethical and legal rights. Right to learn with non-disabled children. They should not be treated as marginal, Rather, they must involve in different community activities. They must be consulted and be involved in decision-making processes. Inclusive in education is the most effective means of combating discriminatory attitudes, creating welcoming community and building an inclusive society. They are essential to the enjoyment and exercise of human right. Thus, the right to an inclusive education for persons with disabilities is a fundamental human right. It emerged first in general guarantees set forth in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and then in more detailed expression in the International Covenant on Economic and Cultural Rights, ICESCR. Other international instruments express the link between the right to education and the needs of persons with disabilities. In addition, states have specific obligations under international law to respect, protect and fulfill the right to inclusive education for persons with disabilities. The obligation to respect requires states to refrain from denying or limiting equal access to inclusive education for persons with disabilities. This right should be guaranteed by law. International and national legal frameworks. International legal framework. There have been international efforts to address equal opportunity of PWDs and employment. To address such challenges primarily from ILO, Specialized Agency of UN and the General Assembly of the UN itself. Most of the endeavors resulted in the adoption of resolutions and recommendations as well as conventions featuring different legal effect. While conventions produce a binding legal effect, resolutions, declarations and recommendation, which are referred as soft laws, do not create binding legal effect. However, it does not mean that they are adopted for no purpose, since they can have a role to play in awareness raising, influencing future development and encourage national policy initiatives. International human rights instruments protect the rights of persons with disabilities through the principles of equality and non-discrimination. There are a number of international legal frameworks regarding people with disability that are aimed at protecting the rights of persons with disabilities through the principles of equality and non-discrimination. The table below indicates the major types of international legal frameworks, key international instruments and other documents that promote inclusion. 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26. 1960 UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education, Articles 1, 3 and 4. 1965 International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, Article 5. 1966 International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Article 13. 1966 International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Articles 18 and 19. 1973 ILO Convention on the Minimum Age for Employment, Article 7. 1979 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Article 10. 1982 World Programme of Action Concerning Disabled Persons Proposals for Implementation. National Action, Part 2. 1989 Convention on the Rights of the Child, Articles 23, 28 and 29. 1989 ILO Convention Concerning Indigenous and Tribal Peoples, Articles 26, 27, 28, 29, 30 and 31. 1990 The World Declaration on Education for All, Jamshid. 1993 The Standard Rules on the Equalization of Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities. 1994 The Salamanca Statement and Framework for Action on Special Needs Education. 1999 ILO Convention on the Worst Forms of Child Labor, Article 7. 1999 Salamanca 5 Years on Review. 2000 World Education Forum Framework for Action, Dakar. 2000 Millennium Development Goals focusing on poverty reduction and development. 2002 IFA Global Monitoring Report, IFA. 2004 IFA Global Monitoring Report, Gender and Education for All: The Leap to Quality. 2005 IFA Global Monitoring Report, Education for All: An Equality Imperative. 2006 IFA Global Monitoring Report, Literacy for Life. 2006 Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. 2007 IFA Global Monitoring Report, Strong Foundations: Early Childhood Care and Education. 2008 IFA Global Monitoring Report, Education for All. By 2015, the following are some of the major international legal frameworks that support inclusion of people with disabilities and vulnerabilities. A. 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26, 1. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. 2. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. 3. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. B. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, 1989 extracts from Articles 2, 23, 28 and 29. Article 2. States parties shall respect and ensure the rights set forth in the present convention to each child within their jurisdiction without discrimination of any kind, irrespective of the child's or his or her parental's or legal guardian's race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national, ethnic or social origin, property, disability, birth or other status. Article 23(1). States parties recognize that a mentally or physically disabled child should enjoy a full and decent life, in conditions which ensure dignity, promote self-reliance, and facilitate the child's active participation in the community. 2. Recognize the right of the child to special care. Subject to available resources. 3. Recognizing the special needs of a disabled child. Taking into account the financial resources of the parents or others caring for the child. Ensure that the disabled child has access to and receives education, training, health care services, rehabilitation services, preparathon for employment and recreation opportunities in a manner conducive to the child's achieving the fullest possible social integration and individual development, including his or her cultural and spiritual development. Article 28. 1. States parties recognize the right of the child to education, and with a view to achieving this right progressively and on the basis of equal opportunity, they shall, in particular, a. Make primary education compulsory and available free to all. B. Encourage the development of different forms of secondary education, including general and vocational education. Make them available and accessible to every child. C. Make higher education accessible to all. D. Make educational and vocational information and guidance available and accessible to all children. E. Take measures to encourage regular attendance at schools and the reduction of dropout rates. Article 29(1). States parties agree that the education of the child shall be directed to a. The development of the child's personality, talents and mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential. B. The development of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. C. The development of respect for the child's parents, his or her own cultural identity, language and values, for the national values of the country in which the child is living, the country from which he or she may originate, and for civilizations different from his or her own. 120. D. The preparation of the child for responsible life in a free society. E. The development of respect for the natural environment. Article 23 focuses specifically on children with disabilities and positively affirms their right to a full and decent life. However, it has weaknesses because it makes the rights of children with disabilities a subject to available resources and focuses on a special needs without defining this. This article needs to be considered in the context of the underpinning principles of the UNCRC, plus Articles 28 and 29 on education that apply to all children. See World Conference on Education for All, Jamshid, and 1990 World Declaration on Education for All, meeting basic learning needs. It acknowledged that educational disparities existed and that many different particular groups were vulnerable to discrimination and exclusion. These included girls, the poor, street and working children, rural and remote populations, minority ethnic groups and other groups, with particular mention made of people with disabilities. Jamshid also catalyzed a move away from a rigid, prescriptive education system towards a flexible system that would be tailor-made, adapted to the needs, Cultures and Circumstances of Learners. Article 3A, Universalizing Access and Promoting Equity. 1. A basic education should be provided to all children, youth and adults. To this end, basic education services of quality should be expanded and consistent measures must be taken to reduce disparities. 2. For basic education to be equitable, all children, youth and adults must be given the opportunity to achieve and maintain an acceptable level of learning. 3. The most urgent priority is to ensure access to, and improve the quality of, education for girls and women, and to remove every obstacle that hampers their active participation. All gender stereotyping in education should be eliminated. 4. An active commitment must be made to removing educational disparities. Underserved groups, the poor, street and working children, rural and remote populations, nomads and migrant workers, indigenous peoples, ethnic, racial, and linguistic minorities, refugees, those displaced by war and people under occupation, should not suffer any discrimination in access to learning opportunities. 5. The learning needs of the disabled demand special attention. Steps need to be taken to provide equal access to education to every category of disabled persons as an integral part of the education system. D. The World Programme of Action, 1982, and the Standard Rules, 1993, the World Programme of Action Concerning Persons with Disability. This originated from the International Year of Disabled Persons in 1981, a landmark period in the history of disability rights. The World Programme of Action laid the foundations for inclusive education by stating that the education of disabled persons should as far as possible take place in the general school system. Responsibility for their education should be placed upon the educational authorities. Note: in many countries the education of disabled children was under the authority of other ministries such as health or social welfare, or none at all. Laws regarding compulsory education should include children with all ranges of disabilities, including the most severely disabled. Educational services for disabled children should be individualized, locally accessible and comprehensive. E. The Standard Rules on the Equalization of Opportunities for Persons with Disabilities. Rule 6. This consists of rules governing all aspects of the rights of people with disabilities. Rule 6 focuses on education and agrees with Jamshin that people with disabilities should be educated as an integral part of the educational system, and that states should have responsibility for the education of people with disabilities. Too often, education for people with disabilities was provided by non-government agencies, letting government say off the hook. Key points include: the state should take responsibility for the education of people with disabilities, and should have a clear policy. B. Have a flexible curriculum. C. Provide quality materials, and ongoing teacher training and support. Integration in mainstream schools is promoted with some key conditions. It should be properly resourced and of high quality. It should not be seen as a cheap option. Special attention should be given to very young and preschool children, and to women with disabilities. Community-based programs are seen as complementary to integrated education. Special education is not ruled out where the mainstream system is inadequate, and for deaf and blind students. Rule 6 states should ensure that the education of persons with disabilities is an integral part of the educational system. Para 1. General education authorities are responsible for the education of people with disabilities. Para 2. Education in mainstream schools presupposes provision of appropriate support services. Para 6 states the need to have a clear policy. B. Have a flexible curriculum. C. Provide quality materials, and ongoing teacher training and support. Para 7. Community-based programs should be seen as complementary to integrated education. Para 8. In cases where the general school system does not adequately meet the needs of all disabled persons, special education may be considered. In some instances, special education may currently be the most appropriate form of education for some students. Para 9. Deaf and blind students may receive more appropriate education in separate schools, special classes or units. F. The Salamanca Statement and Framework for Action on Special Needs Education, 1994. The framework gave rise to the thinking and practice from a different perspective, not from disabled activists, but from the professionals working in schools. trying to find ways to enable all children to learn together. A key difference is that, rather than talking about a particular group, for example children with disabilities or girls, and their rights, in Salamanca the focus was on diversity of children's characteristics and educational needs. It marked a big shift away from the dominant paradigm in special needs education, which was strongly supportive of segregated special schools. It reflected the new thinking in special needs education and promoted the concept of the fully inclusive school. The Salamanca Statement and Framework for Action is still a key international document on the principles and practice of inclusive education. It brings together very eloquently several pioneering and fundamental principles of inclusion, some of which had not been discussed in earlier documents. Article 2. A education system should take into account the wide diversity of children's different characteristics and needs. Regular schools with this inclusive orientation are the most effective means of combating discriminatory attitudes, creating welcoming communities, building an inclusive society and achieving education for all. Moreover, they provide an effective education to the majority of children and improve the efficiency and ultimately the cost-effectiveness of the entire education system. Article 3. Governments should adopt as a matter of law or policy the principle of inclusive education, unless there are compelling reasons for doing otherwise. This article the guiding principle of this framework is that schools should accommodate all children. This should include disabled and gifted children, street and working children, children from remote or nomadic populations, children from linguistic, ethnic or cultural minorities and children from other disadvantaged or marginalized areas or groups. The challenge confronting the inclusive school is that of developing a child-centered pedagogy capable of educating all children. Article 4. Human differences are normal and learning must be adapted to the needs of the child rather than the child fitted to preordained assumptions. A child-centered pedagogy is beneficial to all students, and as a consequence, to society as a whole. It can substantially reduce dropout and repetition while ensuring higher average levels of achievement. Child-centered schools are, moreover, the training ground for a people-orientated society that respects both the differences and dignity of all human beings. Article 6. Inclusion and participation are essential to human dignity and to the enjoyment and exercise of human rights. Article 7. The fundamental principle of the inclusive school is that all children should learn together, wherever possible, regardless of any difficulties or differences they may have. Inclusive schools must recognize and respond to the diverse needs of their students, accommodating both different styles and rates of learning. Article 10. Experience suggests that inclusive schools, serving all of the children in a community, are most successful in eliciting community support and in finding imaginative and innovative ways of using the limited resources that are available. Article 18. Educational policies at all levels, from the national to the local, should stipulate that a child with a disability should attend the neighborhood school, that is, the school that would be attended if the child did not have a disability. G. Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, 2006. Article 24. Education. 1. States parties recognize the right of persons with disabilities to education, with a view to realizing this right without discrimination and on the basis of equal opportunity. States parties shall ensure an inclusive education system at all levels and lifelong learning directed to a. the full development of human potential and sense of dignity and self-worth, and the strengthening of respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms and human diversity. b. the development by persons with disabilities of their personality, talents and creativity, as well as their mental and physical abilities, to their fullest potential. c. enabling persons with disabilities to participate effectively in a free society. 2. In realizing this right, states parties shall ensure that a. persons with disabilities are not excluded from the general education system on the basis of disability, and that children with disabilities are not excluded from free and compulsory primary education, or from secondary education, on the basis of disability. b. Persons with disabilities can access an inclusive, quality and free primary education and secondary education on an equal basis with others in the communities in which they live. c. Reasonable accommodation of the individual's requirements is provided. D. Persons with disabilities receive the support required, within the general education system, to facilitate their effective education. E. Effective individualized support measures are provided in environments that maximize academic and social development, consistent with the goal of full inclusion. 3. States parties shall enable persons with disabilities to learn life and social development skills to facilitate their full and equal participation in education and as members of the community. To this end, states parties shall take appropriate measures, including a. Facilitating the learning of Braille, alternative script, augmentative and alternative modes, means and formats of communication and orientation and mobility skills, and facilitating peer support and mentoring. B. Facilitating the learning of sign language and the promotion of the linguistic identity of the deaf community. C. Ensuring that the education of persons, and in particular children, who are blind, deaf or deaf-blind, is delivered in the most appropriate languages and modes and means of communication for the individual, and in environments which maximize academic and social development. 4. In order to help ensure the realization of this right, states parties shall take appropriate measures to employ teachers, including teachers with disabilities, who are qualified in sign language and/or Braille, and to train professionals and staff who work at all levels of education. Such training shall incorporate disability awareness and the use of appropriate augmentative and alternative modes, means and formats of communication, educational techniques and materials to support persons with disabilities. 5. States parties shall ensure that persons with disabilities are able to access general tertiary education, vocational training, adult education and lifelong learning without discrimination and on an equal basis with others. To this end, states parties shall ensure that reasonable accommodation is provided to persons with disabilities. H. World Education Forum, Dakar, 2000. In April 2000, more than 1,100 participants from 164 countries gathered in Dakar, Senegal, for the World Education Forum, ranging from teachers to prime ministers, academics to policymakers, non-governmental bodies to the heads of major international organizations. They adopted the 2,000 word Dakar Framework for Action: Education for All, meeting our collective commitments. Education for All, meeting our collective commitments. This was the text adopted by the World Education Forum, Dakar, Senegal, 26 April 28, 2007. We hereby collectively commit ourselves to the attainment of the following goals. 1. Expanding and improving comprehensive early childhood care and education, especially for the most vulnerable and disadvantaged children. 2. Ensuring that by 2015 all children, particularly girls, children in difficult circumstances and those belonging to ethnic minorities, have access to incomplete free and compulsory primary education of good quality. 3. Ensuring that the learning needs of all young people and adults are met through equitable access to appropriate learning and life skills programs. 4. Achieving a 50% improvement in levels of adult literacy by 2015, especially for women, and equitable access to basic and continuing education for all adults. V. Eliminating gender disparities in primary and secondary education by 2005, and achieving gender equality in education by 2015, with a focus on ensuring girls have full and equal access to and achievement in basic education of good quality, and vi. Improving all aspects of the quality of education and ensuring excellence of all so that recognized and measurable learning outcomes are achieved by all, especially in literacy, numeracy and essential life skills. 1960 UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education. Articles 1, 3 and 4. Article 1. For the purposes of this convention, the term discrimination includes any distinction, exclusion, limitation or preference which, being based on race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, economic condition or birth, has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing quality of treatment in education and in particular a. of depriving any person or group of persons of access to education of any type or at any level. B. Of limiting any person or group of persons to education of an inferior standard. C. Subject to the provisions of Article 2 of this Convention, of establishing or maintaining separate educational systems or institutions for persons or groups of persons. Or D. Of inflicting on any person or group of persons conditions which are incompatible with the dignity of man. For the purposes of this convention, the term education refers to all types and levels of education, and includes access to education, the standard and quality of education, and the conditions under which it is given. Article 3. In order to eliminate and prevent discrimination within the meaning of this convention, the states parties thereto undertake, a. To abrogate any statutory provisions and any administrative instructions and to discontinue any administrative practices which involve discrimination in education. B. To ensure, by legislation where necessary, that there is no discrimination in the admission of pupils to educational institutions. C. Not to allow any differences of treatment by the public authorities between nationals, except on the basis of merit or need, in the matter of school fees and the grant of scholarships or other forms of assistance to pupils and necessary permits and facilities for the pursuit of studies in foreign countries. D. Not to allow, in any form of assistance granted by the public authorities to educational institutions, any restrictions or preference based solely on the ground that pupils belong to a particular group. E. To give foreign nationals resident within their territory the same access to education as that given to their own nationals. Article 4. The states parties to this convention undertake furthermore to formulate, develop and apply a national policy which, by methods appropriate to the circumstances and to national usage, will tend to promote equality of opportunity and of treatment in the matter of education and in particular, a. To make primary education free and compulsory, make secondary education in its different forms generally available and accessible to all, make higher education equally accessible to all on the basis of individual capacity, assure compliance by all with the obligation to attend school prescribed by law. B. To ensure that the standards of education are equivalent in all public educational institutions of the same level, and that the conditions relating to the quality of the education provided are also equivalent. C. To encourage and intensify by appropriate methods the education of persons who have not received any primary education or who have not completed the entire primary education course and the continuation of their education on the basis of individual capacity. D. To provide training for the teaching profession without discrimination. Let's take a reflection exercise. 1. Have you read the above legal frameworks carefully? Well, most of them have overlapping concepts. Please find out the main overlapping ideas. Tell them to one of your course mates. 2. Which of the international legal frameworks are directly related to inclusive education of persons with disabilities and vulnerabilities? Discuss them with your classmates. National laws and policy frameworks. Why do you think countries enact national laws and policy frameworks regarding issues of the persons with disability and vulnerability? What national laws and policy frameworks do you know? List and discuss in relation to how they protect rights of persons with disabilities in various areas of life. If we talk about Ethiopia's legal and policy documents, he or she finds no disability-related instrument until 1971 of the imperial order to provide for the establishment the rehabilitation agency. Hence, it is possible to speak confidently that a disability was not a matter of law and policy before 1991. This is because of the fact that Ethiopia's serious policy and legal regard towards the right of PWDs had begun after the introduction of a new constitutional order in the country. Ethiopia has signed most of the international conventions and declarations protecting the rights of persons with disabilities. There are also national policies on the rights of persons with disabilities. These different national and international policies, conventions and declarations are presented in various international and local policy documents. The table below is about major national legal frameworks that are related with protecting persons with disabilities' rights in participating different areas of life. National laws and policy frameworks related with rights of people with disabilities: equal participation in education, social, economic, apolitical and other aspect of life. 1. Constitution of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia 1995. Article 41(5) of the Constitution sets out the state's responsibility for the provision of necessary rehabilitation and support services for people with disabilities. This provision, which is found in the socio-economic rights of citizens, does not ensure the equal employment opportunity of PWDs. Rather, it conveys a message that PWDs are among those who deserve assistance since they are incapable of engaging in productive life. 2. Labor Proclamation, No. 377 2003, amended by Labor Proclamation No. 494 2006, it states that it is unlawful for an employer to discriminate against workers on the basis of nationality, sex, religion, political outlook or on any other conditions. 3. The Federal Civil Servant Proclamation No. 515 2007, it offers for special preference in the recruitment, promotion, and deployment, among others, of qualified candidates with disabilities. This provision is applicable to government offices only. 4. Proclamation concerning the rights to employment for persons with disabilities No. 568 2008. The proclamation makes null and void any law, practice, custom, attitude and other discriminatory situations that limit equal opportunities for persons with disabilities. It also requires employers to provide appropriate working and training conditions, take all reasonable accommodation measures and affirm active actions, particularly when employing women with disabilities, and assign an assistant to enable a person with disability to perform their work or follow training. 5. Framework Document 2009, provides for special needs education, SNE, in technical and vocational education and training, VET. 6. Building Proclamation No. 624 2009, provides for accessibility in the design and construction of any building to ensure suitability for physically impaired persons. 7. Proclamation on Definition of Powers of Duties of the Executive Organs of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, No. 691 2010. This provides for conditions of equal opportunities and full participation of persons with disabilities and those living with HIV/AIDS. 8. Growth and Transformation Plan, GTP 2010-2015. It focuses on establishing disability as a cross-cutting sector of development where focus is given to preventing disability and to providing education and training, rehabilitation and equal access and opportunities to persons with disabilities. 9. National Plan of Action of Persons with Disabilities, 2012-2021. The documents aim at making Ethiopia an inclusive society. It addresses the needs of persons with disabilities in Ethiopia for comprehensive rehabilitation services, equal opportunities for education, skills training and work, as well as full participation in the life of their families, communities and the nation. 10. Proclamation concerning the rights of disabled persons to employment No. 101 1994. This document was the only legislation in Ethiopia which specifically provides for the employment of disabled persons. The proclamation aims to protect and promote the rights of disabled persons to appropriate training, employment opportunities and salary, and to prevent any workplace discrimination. Sections 3 and 4 refer to the promotion of employment opportunities for disabled persons in the open labor market. 11. The Federal Civil Servant Proclamation, Proclamation No. 1064 2017. Article 13 halves of Proclamation No. 1064 2017 recognizes that there shall be no discrimination among job seekers or civil servants in filling vacancies because of their ethnic origin, sex, religion, political outlook, disability, HIV/AIDS or any other ground. Therefore, there can be no discrimination against persons with disabilities during job recruitment on the basis of their disability. Moreover, Article 49 of the same proclamation provides for the applicable conditions of work for workers with disabilities as follows. 1. Persons with disabilities shall be entitled to affirmative action in recruitment, promotion, transfer, redeployment, education and training. 2. Any government institution shall ensure that its working environment is conducive to civil servants with disabilities, provide them with the necessary tools and materials and train them how to use such Tools and materials. 3. Any government institution shall have the responsibility to assign a person who shall provide proper assistance for those civil servants with disability that requires assistance. And 4. Privileges prescribed by other laws to persons with disabilities shall be applicable for the implementation of this proclamation. 12. Labor Proclamation 1156/2019. This proclamation controls the private sector employment relationship. Article 15 of the proclamation outlaws discrimination on the basis of disablement. It provides, discrimination any distinction, exclusion or preference made on the basis of nation, race, color, sex, religion, political opinion, national extraction, social origin, HIV/AIDS status, disablement and others, which has the effect of nullifying or impairing quality of opportunity or treatment in employment or occupation. 13. Organization of Civil Society Proclamation No. 1113/2019. This proclamation is a newly enacted legislation replacing its predecessor Proclamation 621/2009. It regulates issues concerning formation, registration, activities and dissolution of civil society organization. Agency for Civil Society Organization has been also established to facilitate and monitor the activities of civil society organization. Article 11 of this proclamation expressly provides that persons with disabilities should be included as a member to enhance and strengthen benefit and involvement of part of the society with disability. Furthermore, Article 62(9) of the same proclamation orders those civil society organizations working on the benefit of the general public to take into account the issue of persons with disabilities. It is established for the benefit of the general public or third parties shall ensure that its activities take into account the interests of women, children, persons with disabilities, the elderly and others exposed to threat or vulnerable groups of the society. 14. The Revised Higher Institutions Proclamation No. 1152/2019. This proclamation has been enacted in replacement of its predecessor Proclamation 650/2009. This proclamation has incorporated some rights entitling students with disabilities, according to Article 51 of such proclamation. Accordingly, the institution shall make, to the extent possible, their facilities and programs amenable to use with relative ease for students with physical disabilities shall, to the extent that situations and resources permit, relocate classes, develop alternative testing procedures, and provide different educational auxiliary aids in the interest of students with physical disabilities and learning disabilities. Consider building designs, campus physical landscape, computers and other infrastructures of institutions shall take into account the interests of physically disabled students, shall ensure that students with physical challenges get academic assistance, including tutorial sessions, exam time and submission date deadline extensions, shall provide additional resources, as necessary, to maintain the speed and need of education. The allocation of additional resources is necessary. The details shall be determined by a Directive 15. Advertisement Proclamation No. 759/2012. It focuses on regulating commercial advertisement are made, according to Article 7/4 of this proclamation. Advertisement which undermines the dignity and emotional feeling of a physically disabled person is immoral. According to Article 7, advertisements shall be deemed to be as having unlawful or immoral content or presentation when they undermine the dignity or emotional feeling of physically disabled person or a person living with HIV/AIDS or suffering from other disease. 16. The Ethiopian Building Proclamation No. 624/2009. Its focus is on buildings and construction. It says that all public building to have a means to access by physical disabled persons. Moreover, it dictates that toilets on such buildings must be accessible. Article 36 states that any public building shall have a means of access suitable for use by physically impaired persons, including those who are obliged to use wheelchairs and those who are able to walk but unable to negotiate steps. Additionally, toilet facilities are required in any building, as adequate number of such facilities shall be made suitable for use by physically impaired persons and shall be accessible to them. 17. Definition of powers and duties of the executive organs of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. Proclamation No. 1097 2018. It mainly focuses on addressing common responsibility of ministries in general and the specific duty for Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs in creating conditions whereby persons with disabilities, the elderly, and segments of society vulnerable to social and economic problems benefit from equal opportunities and full participation. Article 10/4. Moreover, it obliges the mistress work in cooperation with concerned bodies. Article 2911a, 18, Developmental Social Welfare Policy 1997, it specifically targets people with disabilities and sets out to safeguard their rights and to promote opportunities for vocational rehabilitation. Full participation in education, health, political, economic and social activities and other activities. 19. The FDRE Education and Training Policy of 1994. This document recognizes that special attention must be provided for those with special needs. However, it does not have any clear recognition for reasonable accommodation. 20. The FDRE Special Needs, Inclusive Education Strategy 2012. This document focuses on inclusive education policy, strategies and responsibilities of stakeholders. This is the end of Chapter 6 Legal Frameworks. To summarize what we have learned so far, legal frameworks are one of the drivers for the rights of persons with disabilities and vulnerabilities. They have influence on especially educational rights of these people with their peers. Legal frameworks are supposed to serve people with disabilities' needs by keeping equal rights and creating equal opportunity of learning for all, such as children and youth in the mainstreamed classrooms. Moreover, it is believed to create academic and social inclusion, and maintain friendship among persons with and without disabilities and vulnerabilities. Besides, legal frameworks are thought to help the persons with disabilities and vulnerabilities to exploit their potential to the optimum possible level. International national legal frameworks are written in the form of public laws and acts, declarations, conventions and frameworks. These legal frameworks focus on various issues, social, educational, occupational, vocational etc., of children, youth and adults with disabilities. The Ethiopian government has endorsed almost all of the conventions and declarations, but studies showed that various challenges are facing their implementations. As a result, there is mismatch between practice and these frameworks' implementation. There are also national legal frameworks mainly in the form of laws and policies that promote persons with disabilities and vulnerabilities equal participation in education, social welfare, economy and other areas of life. Although Ethiopia has lots of laws, policies and others international legal frameworks ratified by the country, there is gap in implementation and practices that promote equality of people with disabilities and vulnerabilities equal participation in social, educational, occupational, vocational and other aspects of life. This is the end of Chapter 6 Legal Frameworks. Please make sure you have achieved the course objectives mentioned in the beginning of this chapter session. You should now be able to discuss the concept of legal framework and legal frameworks and their implementation, as well as explore gaps in implementation of legal frameworks to implement inclusion and international and national legal frameworks in relation to inclusiveness. Feel free to listen to this audiobook again if you are unsure.